The hall was buzzing with excitement, filled with students, parents, and teachers all waiting for the talent show to begin. The bright lights overhead made the polished wooden floor shine, and the stage at the front looked grand, with a shiny black piano sitting under a single spotlight. It was the kind of piano that made people hold their breath just by looking at it, the kind that promised magic if the right hands touched it. Everyone had their acts ready, dancers, singers, and even a few people showing off magic tricks. But the girl had no fancy costume, no rehearsed dance, and no flashy trick. All she had was her love for music, and the piano had always called to her even when no one else noticed. She stood backstage, clutching her sheet music with trembling hands. Her fingers itched to play, but her stomach was a knot of nerves. She could hear the laughter and chatter from the crowd as other students walked onto the stage, performing confidently. Some of the older kids whispered to each other, pointing toward her. Is she really going to play? She looked so small and nervous. Another voice sneered, I bet she'll ruin it. Watch, she won't even know the keys. Their words weren't loud enough for everyone to hear, but she felt them slicing through her confidence like tiny knives. The girl had always loved the piano, ever since she could remember. She would sit for hours at home, her fingers gently pressing the keys, learning the way each note could tell a story. The piano was her friend, her safe space where she could pour out all her thoughts and feelings. No one had ever seen her practice like this. It was always in secret, in the quiet of her room where mistakes didn't matter. But now, in front of a room full of people who didn't care about her feelings, she had to show what she could do, and that scared her more than anything else. She looked around, trying to steady her breath. The other performers had already gone, and their applause and laughter echoed in the hall. Some acts were good, some were not. But no matter how well or poorly they performed, everyone seemed confident. And then there was her, standing there with shaky legs, holding onto her courage like a fragile umbrella in a storm. She could feel the weight of the audience's eyes, the judging looks, and the whispers that carried through the air. They didn't know her story. They didn't know the hours she had spent learning and practicing, the nights she had stayed up trying to perfect one simple song. But somehow she felt that they were ready to dismiss her before she even began. She thought about leaving, slipping away quietly and avoiding this embarrassment. Her heart pounded and her hands trembled. She imagined walking off the stage, pretending she had an emergency, just so she wouldn't have to face their eyes. But deep down, she knew she couldn't. The piano had been waiting for her just like it always had, and she owed it to herself to play. Not for them, not for the applause, but for her own heart. She took a deep breath and reminded herself of all the little victories she had achieved in her quiet room. Every note she had learned, every melody she had mastered, they were her proof that she could do this. The murmurs grew louder as she stepped onto the stage. Her shoes clicked softly against the polished wood, each step feeling heavier than the last. She moved toward the piano, trying to ignore the voices that mocked her even in passing. She's going to make a fool of herself, someone whispered. Another laughed quietly. Who even told her she could play? She felt the heat rise in her cheeks, but she forced herself to keep moving, her hands brushing against the smooth surface of the piano. For a moment, she froze. Her fingers hovered above the keys, unsure and hesitant. The audience seemed endless, a sea of faces staring at her, waiting for her first note. She closed her eyes for a second, remembering the quiet nights when she played alone, when the music made her feel brave and alive. And in that memory, she found a tiny spark of courage. She opened her eyes and let her hands rest lightly on the keys. The first notes she played were soft, almost shy. They trembled like a whisper, like the sound of someone trying to speak without being heard. She expected laughter, expected them to snicker, but something unexpected happened. A few people leaned forward, curious, trying to hear what this quiet girl could do. The sound of the piano filled the hall, gentle but full of meaning. It was as if the piano itself was speaking for her, telling the story she didn't have the words to say. As she continued, the music started to flow more freely. Her fingers moved with a confidence that surprised even her. She remembered every moment she had spent practicing, every time she had corrected a mistake or repeated a song until it sounded right. All of that practice, all of that dedication was here now, carried through the notes that resonated in the room. The mocking voices faded into the background, drowned out by the purity of the music. Yet she couldn't stop noticing the eyes that still watched her. Some were skeptical, some were confused, and some were slowly softening, as if they were realizing that there was more to her than they had assumed. She had never played in front of such a crowd, and yet, Something inside her pushed her forward. Every chord, every melody, every pause was a declaration that she belonged here, that her music mattered. She could feel her heart slowing, her hands moving more naturally. The nervousness that had felt like a storm inside her was settling into a rhythm, a steady beat that matched the music. She noticed the small details, the shine of the piano keys under the stage lights, the way the music echoed against the walls, and even the shifting expressions of the audience. Each note she played seemed to reach someone, touch someone, and in that moment, the fear that had held her back felt distant, almost meaningless. There was a strange mix of emotions running through her: relief, excitement, and a growing sense of pride. She was doing it. She was standing there, playing the piano, and slowly, just slowly, she realized that the laughter and whispers didn't matter. They had no power over her as long as she let the music speak. And in that realization, a tiny smile appeared on her face. It wasn't a wide, confident smile yet, but it was the beginning of one. The beginning of someone who had chosen to face fear instead of hiding from it. The hall remained silent except for the sound of her playing. No one clapped, no one cheered yet, but the mocking had stopped. For the first time in her life, she felt that she could be seen for who she truly was. Not the girl who could be laughed at, but the girl who had something to offer, something beautiful to share. The piano was her voice, and she was finally letting it speak freely. And as she continued to play, she felt herself growing stronger with every note. The girl who had stepped onto the stage trembling, afraid and uncertain, was slowly disappearing, replaced by someone who believed in herself, even if just a little. That belief, fragile as it was, became the first step toward changing how everyone saw her and how she saw herself. The journey had only just begun, but she had already crossed the most difficult part, stepping onto the stage, facing the crowd and choosing to play, even when they expected her to fail. The first few notes had settled in the hall, soft and careful like tentative footsteps in a quiet room. She could feel the tension in her shoulders easing just a little, as if the piano was helping her breathe. Every sound seemed to echo, stretching across the space between her and the audience. It was strange how a few simple notes could feel so powerful. The crowd was still quiet, still watching, but there was a shift. Some faces that had been laughing or whispering now looked curious, their eyebrows raised in surprise. She remembered why she had wanted to play in the first place. It wasn't about winning or showing off or proving anyone wrong. It was about music, about letting something inside her flow freely even when she was scared. She closed her eyes for a brief moment, letting her fingers find the keys by memory and instinct. In that pause, she felt herself standing taller, as though the music itself was giving her courage. Each note she pressed was a tiny victory over the doubt that had been whispering in her mind. For a long moment, she worried that the crowd still wouldn't care, that someone would shout something cruel, that the mocking would start again. But as her hands moved, creating a gentle, flowing melody, she noticed a few things that gave her hope. A parent leaned forward in their seat, listening intently. A younger student sat completely still, eyes wide, watching her fingers move across the keys. Even the older students, the ones who had whispered and laughed before, seemed to pause. They weren't smiling or clapping yet, but the surprise in their eyes was clear. They were hearing something they hadn't expected. She began to let herself play a little more freely. Her fingers had grown more confident, moving across the keys with a rhythm that felt natural. She remembered the long nights alone in her room, when the world was silent and only the piano mattered. She had practiced songs over and over, sometimes struggling with a single note, sometimes crying out of frustration when it didn't sound right. But tonight all of that practice mattered. Every mistake she had ever corrected, every long hour of dedication was helping her now. A small smile formed on her face as she realized she was no longer playing for anyone else. She was playing for herself, for the music and for the joy that had always been hers when she sat alone at the piano. The crowd's reaction, whether positive or negative, didn't matter in that moment. And that thought gave her a freedom she had never known before. Each note felt lighter, each chord warmer. She could feel the story of the song flowing through her fingers, through the room, into the hearts of those who were listening. The girl noticed that a few of the audience members were now leaning closer. Their whispers had stopped. The sneers had vanished. She could see the shift happening, even though she kept her focus on the keys. The music was speaking louder than words ever could. Some students exchanged glances, silently acknowledging that they had underestimated her, and for the first time she felt a flicker of pride. Not the kind that demanded recognition, but the quiet, deep kind that comes from knowing you are doing something true to yourself. Her mind drifted back to the times she had practiced alone, imagining herself performing in front of people, always afraid of what might happen. She remembered the moments of doubt, the nights she wanted to give up, the times she felt her fingers were clumsy or slow. And now here she was, actually doing it. She realized that every small moment of persistence had led to this one. Every time she had chosen to sit at the piano rather than walk away had mattered more than she had ever understood. She played with more expression, letting the music rise and fall, softening in one place and growing stronger in another. The melody carried a piece of her story, a mixture of fear, hope, and determination. She noticed the subtle reactions in the audience, eyes widening, heads tilting, a few people shifting forward in their seats. They were starting to feel what she felt, even if they didn't understand the hours she had spent learning each note. It was a silent connection, fragile and new but real. Some of the students who had mocked her earlier looked uncomfortable now, as if they were realizing that their laughter had been misplaced. She didn't focus on them, but she could sense their change. The music didn't need to argue or prove anything. It simply existed, and its power was enough. She allowed herself to breathe more easily, letting the melody guide her hands instead of her nerves. The piano and she were in sync, and the feeling was like nothing she had experienced before. The girl remembered the encouragement she had received from a teacher who had noticed her talent long ago. That teacher had always believed in her, even when she doubted herself. Their words echoed in her mind, simple but strong. Let the music speak. It will tell your story better than words ever could. She realized that this was the moment they had meant. It wasn't just a performance, it was her story unfolding note by note for anyone who wanted to listen. With that thought, she allowed the music to grow bolder. She added small flourishes, little touches she had invented during her private practice, ways to make the song more alive. Her fingers danced over the keys with a confidence that surprised her. The audience responded subtly at first, leaning closer, their expressions changing from casual curiosity to genuine attention. The laughter and whispers from before had vanished entirely. People were listening. People were seeing her, really seeing her for the first time. She noticed one of the younger students in the audience smiling softly, as if the music had reached them in a way that words never could. Another student seemed to hold their breath, unable to look away, and somewhere in the crowd an adult's eyes glistened slightly, touched by the unexpected beauty of the performance. These small reactions filled her with a quiet warmth. It wasn't about fame or applause. It was about connection, about sharing a piece of herself in a way that no words could capture. Even though she had gained confidence, there was still a small flicker of fear inside her. She wondered if she could maintain this level of playing until the very end, if her hands would falter, or if a mistake would ruin everything. But then she reminded herself of all the times she had faced challenges alone at the piano, all the times she had continued despite doubt or fear. She could do this. She had prepared for this not just with practice but with courage. Each note reinforced that courage, building her confidence like bricks in a wall. As the song progressed, the music started to tell more than a melody. It told a story. It spoke of fear and overcoming, of quiet moments spent learning and growing, of the small victories that lead to something greater. The girl could feel the energy of the room shifting with every chord. The tension, the skepticism, the mockery, it all melted away, replaced by attention, curiosity, and awe. The power of music was revealing itself, and she was at the center of it, guiding it forward with every touch of the keys. She noticed her own smile growing. She was no longer afraid of the audience. Instead, she felt a sense of partnership with them. The music was hers, but it was also theirs now. They were listening, experiencing it with her, and in that shared space she found a strength she hadn't known she had. It was intoxicating, freeing, and humbling all at once. She realized that performing wasn't just about showing skill. It was about letting yourself be vulnerable, letting yourself be seen, and trusting that what you offer has value. By now, the audience was completely silent, captivated by the performance. Even the students who had mocked her earlier were leaning forward, unable to tear their eyes away from her hands moving across the piano. She had begun to forget about them entirely, focusing only on the music and the feeling it carried. The confidence she had been building all evening now seemed unstoppable. She could hear the depth in the notes, feel the rhythm, and connect every sound to her own heart. It was a delicate balance, careful yet expressive, quiet yet commanding. The girl had discovered a new part of herself, a version that could face fear and still create beauty. She had begun the journey trembling, unsure, and full of doubt. But now, even as the first part of her performance neared its end, she felt a deep, satisfying sense of control and peace. She was doing what she had come to do, playing not for recognition but for herself, and in doing so, showing the world a small glimpse of who she truly was. And as she let the last notes linger softly in the hall, she felt a quiet triumph. She had faced the mockery, faced her fear, and had allowed the music to speak. The song was not over, and she knew there was more to come. But this moment, the moment she had chosen to continue despite the doubt, was already a victory. She had discovered that courage wasn't about being fearless. It was about moving forward even when fear existed, about trusting in yourself and your abilities even when others had laughed or doubted you. The girl had begun to find her rhythm, her fingers moving across the piano keys with growing confidence. The music that once felt timid now flowed freely, rising and falling like waves in a gentle sea. Each note carried more than sound. It carried her heart, her story, her quiet determination that had carried her this far. She could feel the energy of the hall shifting as the audience leaned in, drawn into the music, almost holding their breath to catch every sound. Her eyes flicked briefly to the crowd. Faces that had been skeptical were now attentive, some showing surprise, others awe. She had expected a room of judgment, but now there was curiosity, and even a touch of respect in the way people were watching. It was a strange sensation for her, to feel noticed not for appearance or popularity, but for something she had nurtured quietly, something personal that had always been hers alone until now. The melody she played was simple, yet it carried layers of emotion. She remembered the nights spent practicing, when each wrong note had frustrated her and each small success had made her heart leap. Those memories were alive in her fingers now, guiding her movements as if her hands remembered every touch, every effort, every quiet hour she had spent learning. The piano was no longer just an instrument. It was an extension of herself, speaking in a language she had learned in solitude. As she played, her nervousness faded entirely. The sound of the keys under her fingers was like a bridge connecting her to the audience. For the first time, she felt less like a girl being judged and more like a storyteller sharing something real. She had begun to lose herself in the music, and with each note she felt her confidence expand. This wasn't about proving anyone wrong anymore. It was about embracing the gift she had, the passion that had always lived quietly inside her, and letting it flow without hesitation. She added small variations, subtle changes she had learned to make her playing more expressive. The melody became richer, with gentle pauses that added weight to the music and crescendos that lifted the atmosphere in the room. Her heart pounded not with fear, but with the exhilaration of creating something alive, something that moved people without a single word spoken. The audience was completely absorbed, and she could feel it. The energy of the room was shifting, changing from doubt to fascination, from mockery to wonder. Her mind wandered to the moments that had led her here. She remembered the teasing from classmates, the whispers that had stung in the past, the days when she had felt alone and invisible. And yet, all of those experiences had shaped her determination. They had been obstacles, yes, but obstacles that had pushed her to work harder, to practice longer, to believe in the music even when no one else did. And now, in this moment, those challenges seemed distant, overshadowed by the power of her own voice through the piano. The audience began to react in small ways. Heads tilted, eyes widened. A few people leaned forward as if trying to catch every nuance of the music. Even the students who had mocked her earlier seemed unsettled, their confident smirks replaced with silent attention. It wasn't just the notes. It was the emotion behind them, the story they were telling. She realized that music had the power to change perceptions, to speak where words often failed, and she felt a surge of pride knowing that she was creating that change with her own hands. She allowed herself a deep breath and let her fingers move more freely. The melody became more complex, but it was natural, not forced. Every chord, every trill, every pause was intentional, carrying meaning she could feel but could not fully explain. She thought of all the times she had been alone with her piano, practicing in quiet corners of her home, and she understood that those moments had prepared her for this exact experience. Every struggle, every tear, every night spent perfecting a song had led to this chance to truly shine. The girl noticed a subtle transformation in herself as well. She had started the evening timid and uncertain, fearful of what others might think. But now she felt empowered. She realized that courage wasn't the absence of fear. It was continuing in spite of it. She was no longer the girl worried about whispers and laughter. She was the musician, the storyteller, the creator, and with that realization, each note felt even more alive, vibrant with her passion and intent. The music swelled, rising and falling like a gentle tide, each movement reflecting her emotions. She felt the story of her journey pouring out through the keys, the struggle, the doubt, the perseverance, and the quiet moments of triumph. For the first time, she felt truly understood, even if only through sound. The audience, caught in the spell of her playing, seemed to share in that understanding even unconsciously. She had never played for anyone like this before, and the sensation was both thrilling and humbling. She glanced briefly at the stage lights, reflecting off the polished black piano, and felt a sense of wonder. How could something so ordinary in appearance carry such extraordinary power? The instrument had been her companion for years, patient and silent, waiting for her to trust it. And now that trust had been rewarded, as the music seemed to resonate not only through the hall but through her own heart, filling her with a strength she hadn't known she possessed. Her fingers danced across the keys with growing speed and precision, each movement deliberate yet effortless. The melody shifted, becoming brighter, more dynamic, reflecting the joy she felt in the moment. She noticed subtle shifts in the audience, some leaning forward, some closing their eyes to listen more intently, and others whispering softly to each other, unable to hide their admiration. She realized she was no longer playing to impress or prove anything. She was simply expressing herself, and that honesty was enough to captivate anyone willing to listen. The girl felt an unexpected warmth spreading through her chest. The earlier mockery, the whispered doubts, all the fear she had carried onto the stage, none of it mattered now. What mattered was the connection she was creating through music. Every note, every chord, every delicate pause was a bridge reaching out to those who were watching. And in return, she felt their attention, their curiosity, their appreciation. It was a quiet, powerful exchange, one that required no words but conveyed everything she wanted to express. She paused for a brief moment, letting her hands hover above the keys, listening to the echoes of the last few notes. The hall was silent except for the gentle hum of the piano's resonance. In that pause, she felt the weight of the moment fully. She had faced fear, stood in front of an audience, and allowed herself to be vulnerable. And in doing so, she had discovered something incredible. Not just that she could play, but that her music could touch people, could make them pause, could make them feel. The girl took a deep breath and continued, the melody now flowing with renewed energy and grace. She incorporated the subtle flourishes she had practiced countless times alone, the small twists that made the music uniquely hers. Each variation added depth, each chord brought emotion to life. She felt herself growing more confident with every second, more immersed in the music and more aware of the audience's silent admiration. They were captivated, and she was finally seeing the results of her courage, patience, and dedication. She let the music rise to a gentle crescendo, the sound filling every corner of the hall. Her fingers moved faster, yet each note remained clear, precise, and full of feeling. She could see some of the students who had mocked her earlier, their faces open with surprise and wonder. Others were whispering to each other, perhaps realizing for the first time the depth of her talent. But she did not focus on them. She focused on the music, on the story she was telling, and on the joy of sharing a part of herself that had always been waiting for this moment. Time seemed to stretch and bend as she played. Each second felt longer, yet filled with purpose. She had learned long ago that music was more than notes and rhythms. It was expression, communication, a language of the heart. And now in the hall filled with attentive eyes, she was speaking fluently, telling her story without a single word. She felt exhilaration and peace simultaneously, a rare combination that made her feel alive in a way she had never imagined. As the melody continued, she allowed herself to truly feel the music, to let it flow without restraint. Her earlier fear had transformed into energy, her nervousness into focus, and her uncertainty into determination. Each chord carried more weight, each pause more meaning. She was no longer playing a song, she was painting a picture, creating a world for the audience to step into, a world shaped by her feelings, her journey, and her courage. And in that moment she realized that this was more than just a performance. It was a turning point. She had crossed the threshold from doubt to confidence, from fear to courage, from silence to expression. The audience was no longer merely watching. They were listening, feeling, and connecting. She was no longer the quiet girl unsure of herself. She was a musician, a storyteller, and a force that could move people simply by being true to herself. The girl had reached a point where the music seemed to carry her entirely. Her fingers flew over the piano keys with confidence, yet each note remained delicate and precise, as though she was balancing on the edge of a fragile bridge made of sound. The hall was completely silent except for the piano, and in that silence every note echoed, filling the space with energy and emotion that was impossible to ignore. She could feel the audience leaning closer without even trying. The students who had once mocked her were frozen, their eyes wide, unable to hide the shock on their faces. Some parents were sitting forward in their seats, their expressions softening as they listened intently. Even the teachers who had observed her nervousness at the start were now watching with admiration, realizing that this shy girl had transformed into something extraordinary right before their eyes. The music swelled and grew richer, each chord more powerful than the last. She let herself play with abandon, allowing the emotions that had been bottled inside her for years to flow freely through her fingers. The melody told a story, one of struggle, courage, and the quiet strength that comes from believing in oneself even when others do not. Each note was a word, each chord a sentence, and the story poured into the hearts of everyone who listened. Her hands moved faster, yet with remarkable control. She could feel every vibration of the keys through her fingertips, every resonance of the strings beneath them. It was as if the piano and she were connected by an invisible thread, sharing energy, emotion, and intention. She had practiced for years, but this performance was different. It was alive, unpredictable, and beautiful in ways that practice alone could never create. The audience's initial surprise had shifted to amazement. Whispers and laughter had completely vanished. Even those who had doubted her now seemed incapable of turning away. Their attention was total, captivated by the raw talent and emotion emanating from the stage. Some faces were open in disbelief, others glowed with admiration. It was no longer just a performance. It was an experience, a moment that would linger in their memories long after it ended. She noticed a few students exchanging silent glances, their earlier arrogance replaced with a sense of wonder. The girl could sense their change without looking directly at them. Her music was speaking louder than words ever could, reaching people who had dismissed her too quickly, teaching them that judgment based on appearances or assumptions was meaningless compared to talent and heart. The melody shifted, moving from soft, tender passages to powerful, sweeping sequences that filled the hall with energy. She allowed her emotions to guide her hands, letting joy, fear, hope, and triumph flow into every key she pressed. The audience felt the intensity of it, some leaning forward in their seats, some closing their eyes to fully absorb the sound. Every note seemed to carry a part of her story, her journey, and her determination to rise above the doubt and ridicule she had faced. She could feel her heart racing, but it was not from fear, it was exhilaration, a rush of pure joy that came from doing what she loved and sharing it with others. For the first time, she understood that music was more than sound. It was connection, a way to touch hearts without saying a single word. And in that connection, she felt a power that was both humbling and freeing. Her fingers danced across the keys, moving in ways that were both precise and expressive. She added subtle flourishes and trills she had never dared to try in public before, letting the music soar with complexity and grace. The hall seemed to hold its breath, each note hanging in the air like a fragile jewel, and the audience could not help but be swept away. It was a rare moment of shared awe, where every person in the room was united by the beauty of the performance. The girl felt tears prick at her eyes, but she did not stop. She embraced the emotion, letting it fuel her playing instead of holding her back. She thought about the hours spent practicing alone, the nights when no one believed in her, the moments of doubt and frustration that had threatened to make her quit. All of that had led to this instant, and she realized that her perseverance had transformed into something remarkable. She had faced fear, and now she was creating something that could move people in ways words never could. The music became more intricate, a blend of rapid sequences and gentle, lingering chords. Each movement carried intention and feeling, capturing the attention of everyone in the hall. Some parents whispered to each other in awe, while students who had been skeptical were now silent, caught entirely by the performance. She noticed the teacher who had encouraged her long ago, their eyes glistening slightly with pride. That support, though quiet and distant, had been a guiding force, and she felt gratitude for it as she continued to play. She allowed herself to take small risks, adding flourishes and variations that she had only ever tried in the privacy of her practice room. The music soared, echoing through the hall with an energy that was electrifying yet graceful. The audience responded in subtle ways, soft gasps, widened eyes, leaning forward to capture every nuance. She felt the connection deepening, the bridge between her and the listeners growing stronger with every passing note. Her mind drifted briefly to those who had mocked her before she began. She didn't feel anger or resentment, only a quiet satisfaction. The laughter that had once seemed so sharp and cruel was now irrelevant. Her music spoke louder than any words of ridicule. It was proof that talent and passion could overcome judgment, and that courage, even when it felt small and fragile, could create moments of magic. The melody shifted again, moving into a part she had practiced many times but never dared to play with such intensity. Her fingers flew across the keys with both speed and precision, every chord resonating with clarity and emotion. She felt the energy of the hall, the attention of the audience, and it pushed her further, inspiring her to give more of herself in the music. Every note was a declaration, a statement that she belonged, that her talent mattered, and that she had the right to share it. The audience's reaction was subtle, but unmistakable. The earlier sneers and whispers were completely gone. Now they were captivated, almost spellbound. Some were holding their breath, trying not to blink, afraid to miss a single detail. Others leaned forward, mouths slightly open in amazement, as if trying to take in every sound at once. She had never seen such attention, and yet she didn't falter. Instead, it inspired her, making the music flow even more naturally and beautifully. Her heart felt full, not from fear, but from joy and connection. She realized that the music had become bigger than herself, bigger than the hall, bigger than the performance. It was a shared experience, a story told through notes that could be understood by anyone willing to listen. She felt proud, not in a boastful way, but in the quiet, deep way that comes from knowing you have given your all and touched others in the process. The girl allowed herself a final, daring flourish, a sequence of chords that rose and fell like waves in the ocean, both gentle and powerful. Her fingers moved with confidence and emotion, guided by instinct and experience. The hall seemed to hold its breath, the echoes of her playing lingering in the air, resonating with the hearts of the audience. It was the moment she had dreamed of, the moment when her courage, practice, and passion had all come together to create something unforgettable. As the last note faded, there was a moment of absolute silence. The audience seemed frozen, caught in the final echo of the music. Then, slowly, a ripple of reaction began to spread. A few people clapped softly at first, as if testing the waters, unsure if this was really happening. Then the applause grew louder, stronger, more confident. Hands clapped, some shouted in excitement, and the energy in the hall shifted entirely. The girl sat at the piano, breathing heavily, but smiling quietly to herself. She had done it. She had faced fear, ignored ridicule, and allowed herself to be seen and heard. The music had spoken for her, revealing a talent and courage that no one could deny. For a moment, she simply allowed herself to feel the triumph, the relief, and the joy of having shared her heart with the world. The applause continued, growing in intensity, and she could see the faces of the audience, astonished, impressed, and moved. Even those who had doubted her were clapping, some with smiles of admiration, others with expressions that seemed almost apologetic. She felt no need for their approval anymore. The music itself had done all the talking. She had proven her own worth first and foremost, and that was the most important victory of all. The applause seemed to roll through the hall like waves, filling every corner, bouncing off the walls, and surrounding the girl with warmth she had never felt before. Her hands rested lightly on the piano keys, trembling slightly from the effort and emotion of the performance. The crowd's reaction was unlike anything she had imagined. Some were standing now, clapping with unrestrained enthusiasm. Others had tears in their eyes, moved by the music that had spoken straight to their hearts. She had never felt so seen, so heard, and so valued. For a moment, she simply sat there, letting the energy wash over her. The nervousness, the fear, and the doubt that had weighed on her only an hour ago seemed distant and almost unreal. They had been replaced by something stronger, a quiet sense of triumph and belonging. She realized she had done more than play a song. She had shared a piece of herself, something that had always lived quietly in her heart. And in doing so, she had reached out to every person in the room. The students who had mocked her before were now part of the applause. Their expressions mixed with surprise, admiration, and even a hint of guilt. Some of them whispered to each other, likely discussing how they had underestimated her, but she didn't mind them at all. Their earlier words had no power over her anymore. What mattered was the truth she had revealed through her music, that talent, passion, and courage could not be dismissed so easily. The girl slowly rose from the piano bench, bowing slightly to the audience. Her legs were shaky, but her heart felt strong. She allowed herself to look around at the people who had watched her, seeing their smiles, their awe, and their appreciation. Every clap, every cheer was a reminder that her efforts had mattered, that the years of private practice, the hours spent perfecting notes and learning to trust her own hands had not been wasted. They had led her to this moment, a moment that would stay with her forever. She remembered the teacher who had quietly encouraged her from the beginning. That teacher had always seen something special in her, something she sometimes doubted herself. She could feel gratitude swelling in her chest. Without their guidance, without the small words of encouragement, she might have given up before even trying. Now she understood the value of support, of someone believing in you when you cannot believe in yourself. That belief had been a spark that ignited her courage, and she felt a quiet determination to carry it forward in all her future endeavors. Some parents were approaching, whispering words of praise, telling her how incredible the performance had been. Their kindness made her cheeks warm, and she smiled softly, nodding in appreciation. She did not need the praise, but it felt good to know that her music had touched others in ways beyond her own understanding. Even the younger students who had watched silently seemed inspired, some whispering to their friends about how amazing it had been. The effect of her music was subtle yet powerful, and she realized that sharing her gift could influence others in ways she had never imagined. The girl took a quiet breath, feeling a mix of exhaustion and exhilaration. Her hands were sore from the intensity of the performance, but the soreness was almost sweet, a reminder of what she had accomplished. She had faced her fears, challenged herself, and succeeded beyond what she thought was possible. The applause continued, but she let herself step back, savoring the moment in silence for a few heartbeats. It was hers now, a memory she would carry with her forever. She noticed some of the students who had been particularly cruel or dismissive earlier looking at her differently now. Their expressions showed something that was hard to describe, a mix of respect and astonishment. They had assumed that because she was quiet, she was weak, but her performance had shattered that assumption. And while she did not play to teach them a lesson, she understood that sometimes actions spoke far louder than words. Her music had done what words could not. It had changed their perception without confrontation, without anger, simply through authenticity and talent. A small child in the front row raised their hand and whispered to a parent about how magical the music had sounded. The girl saw the parent smile, squeezing the child's shoulder, and she felt a warmth that went beyond applause. This was impact, subtle and real. It reminded her that art was not only about recognition, but about touching lives even in small ways, and creating moments that people would remember long after the sounds had faded. The girl allowed herself to reflect on the journey that had brought her here. She remembered the nights spent practicing alone, when no one else cared or noticed. She remembered the fear that had gripped her the moment she stepped onto the stage. She remembered the mockery, the whispers, and the moments when doubt had threatened to make her quit. And yet she had persevered, trusting herself and the music she loved. That perseverance had transformed into triumph, a victory that no one could take away. She felt her confidence growing with every passing moment. It was no longer about one performance or one audience. It was about trusting herself, embracing her passions, and understanding that her voice, through music, had power. The realization was profound. She had discovered a strength inside herself that went far beyond skill, one that would guide her through future challenges, both on and off the stage. As the audience continued to cheer, she noticed subtle smiles, nods of approval, and even a few people wiping away tears. The music had bridged the gap between her and them, creating a connection that was deeper than mere observation. They had witnessed not only her skill but also her courage, her willingness to take a risk, and her authenticity. That connection was perhaps the most rewarding part of all. Some of the students who had once whispered cruel words approached her hesitantly, offering quiet congratulations. She accepted them with grace, her heart untroubled by their past behavior. It was not resentment that filled her now, but a sense of completion, of having proven to herself that she was capable. Their change in demeanor was simply an added acknowledgement, not a necessity. She had faced her own fears and emerged stronger, and that was all that truly mattered. The girl sat back at the piano for a moment, letting her fingers rest on the keys. She reflected on the experience, thinking about how fear had once held her back, how doubt had whispered in her ear, and how courage had ultimately carried her through. She realized that the journey was more important than the applause. It had been the act of stepping forward, trusting herself and embracing vulnerability that had defined this moment. The performance itself was simply the manifestation of that inner journey. She looked around one last time, taking in the faces of the audience, and felt a quiet sense of satisfaction. The room had been transformed, not just by the music but by the presence of someone brave enough to share it. The applause had died down, leaving a warm hum of appreciation in the air. She knew that many people would remember this night, that her courage had made an impression, and that the magic of music had left its mark. As she rose to leave the stage, she felt a sense of peace and accomplishment unlike anything she had known. She had faced ridicule, overcome fear, and embraced her talent fully. She had shared a part of herself with the world, and in doing so she had inspired, moved, and amazed those who had doubted her. It was a victory for her spirit, her courage, and her passion. She stepped off the stage, the applause still echoing in the background, and felt her heart light and free. The experience had changed her, not because of the attention or recognition, but because she had learned to trust herself and her abilities. She had discovered that perseverance, courage, and authenticity could create moments of true magic, and she knew that from this moment onward she would never let fear or doubt hold her back again. Walking through the hall, she noticed the whispers of admiration, the smiles, and even the awe in people's eyes. The journey had been difficult, the fear real, but the outcome was worth every step. She realized that this was only the beginning, that her love for music and her newfound confidence would carry her forward into countless other moments of challenge and triumph. And in that realization, she felt ready for whatever lay ahead, filled with hope, courage, and the knowledge that she could achieve more than she had ever imagined.